Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm the Center Square's state government correspondent, Carlene Johnson. Along with me today, TJ Martinell, our investigative reporter here for the Center Square in Washington State, who has uncovered some new details about how Climate Commitment Act revenues are being spent. And a giant chunk of that seems like it's going into the electrification of Washington State Ferries, while at the same time, we've had some officials, including our own Governor Bob Ferguson, kind of make some reallocate where those boats are going to be built to electrify and maybe how fast we should be moving in that direction, because it's easier said than done. So tell me how much money we're spending to electrify ferries and if this is a good use of our CCA funding. TJ?
Well, I mean, it's going to take billions. They've already estimated, like, we're talking $5 to $6 billion to electrify. And because it's not just the fact that these ferries are more expensive than diesel, they also have to deal with the fact that they require charging. So, you know, this is this is also new for this, just as far as transportation and public transit. But what's interesting about this is that the funding. So there was like $1 billion spent in the fiscal year 2025 with Climate Commitment Act revenue, and out of that, about 600 million of it went to Washington State Ferries for this very purpose. So effectively, the CCA is funding the electrification of the state ferry fleet, and this has actually not been really anything new. I've written in the past before about the fact that. If the CCA had been defeated by that one ballot initiative, it would have completely, pardon the expression, it would have sunk any hopes they would have had of doing this, because there's just no where you're going to get the money to do this. And so, like you were saying, the question is this a good use of taxpayer dollars? Because there's a lot of other things that this money could be spent on. But I've also written about how, this is people can argue the extent to which, former Governor Inslee said it was pennies, which I think most people don't agree with, but it is affecting the price of gas here in Washington State, because there are some areas in the country where gas has gone under $3 a gallon. We're still in the $3, high $3, low $4 range. And that's partly, I would argue, driven by carbon auctions and how that's being passed on to consumers and drivers. But so what it's doing is it's a de facto gas tax, but without the restrictions on it. So effectively, people at the pump are paying in terms of higher gas prices to fund this kind of thing here. So that's pretty much what's going on, is that the CCA is primarily a program to fund the electrification of our state ferry fleet.
Now we have one that is already in service. Over the summer, we had the MV Wenatchee that was converted at what I think your article said it was $133 million is what it, and remind me how long that boat was out of service.
It's not just
they electrified it.
It's not just that it was out of service. It's at a time when the fleet, they are. I think for anybody who uses our ferry system on a regular basis understands how it, I don't want to say in disarray, but it needs. I think there's just a lot of instability, and there's basically a lack of boats. There's a lack of ferries, and that's why they've had to close a lot of lines or service routes or something like that, or they've had to cancel trips due to this kind of stuff. So this is all going on with that in mind, as opposed to saying, hey, let's get let's get ferries the fastest and quickest way, which is what diesel would have done. And what's also interesting is the companies that are going to be building our new electric ferries are based out of Florida, not Washington State. So we're not even.
Yeah, why is that? Because we've got shipbuilders here. We've been doing that forever.
Yeah,
but that didn't.
A lot of that stuff was during World War II. For people who know the history, our docks were full, and the production was high. So it's not like we can't. It's that other companies can do it for cheaper. And there's a whole different variety of reasons. It's not necessarily related to the CCA per se, but it's just the fact that another company put in a lower bid.
We've got regulations, and you got to have certain number of union employees and all those other things, right? That make it more expensive, basically, to
Well,
do
and
business.
and this is kind of an aside, but it really begs the question of what's the point of having regulations for companies in the state if you're going to export your business for those types of industries to another state? It's sort of like saying, I mean, this again, this is a side, but since we're talking about the CCA and talking about carbon emissions, what's the point of imposing all sorts of carbon emission restrictions on companies here, but then you go buy products in a country where they have no carbon emission restrictions? You know, what's the if it's to lower the carbon emissions for Washington State, which we've seen, they will not approve projects that raise our emissions, even if it lowers global emissions, because it means it's not going to a country where there are no environmental regulations. So
Mm,
it
yeah.
begs the question of, so if we're going to start having our work done in other states where they don't have these regulations, what's the point? If, to quote No Country for Old Men, if the rules brought you to here, of what use were the rules? You know?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of people that are asking that question. Meantime, ecology is providing some numbers as far as we know we're way behind on getting any kind of like true emissions reduction figures from ecology, but they claim some numbers of carbon emission reduction based on what they've done with even just the replacement of the one ferry and some of the other things that they're doing. But you got some very conflicting information, or at least numbers
I would
from
call it a red
Washington
flag.
policy that were different. Yeah,
I would call it a red
yeah.
flag.
So talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ecology claims in their report that the overall in the 2 years since the CCA started, and they've been funding these projects, they've reduced carbon by, I think, 9 million metric tons. There is a project based in Ellensburg that claims that they contributed to 3.5 million of those carbon emission reductions. So that's a third. So put differently, a project in Ellensburg is claiming that they contributed to over 30% of total carbon reductions by the CCA funded projects.
How could that even be? And I mean,
That is a very good
Ellensburg
question.
isn't a tiny.
I've asked Ecology. I've asked Ecology to, like, wait a minute, what exactly here's the question we have to ask. What did they do, and why are they not doing more of it? If a $4 million project in Ellensburg is able to reduce carbon emissions by 3.5 million metric tons, then they should be funding every project like that. And you've just solved our, they're at least the state knows how
Warming
to meet
problems.
its environmental goals that it set. So again, I've asked for more details from Ecology, but they're also, so here's the other problem with this, is that they're claiming $1 spent per metric ton of carbon reduced. Well, there was a similar project in King County that claimed that their cost was $613, and it was literally the same project. Now, granted, the project was smaller and it reduced fewer carbons, metric tons. But the point is the cost ratio. How can it be 613 times more expensive to do it? Like, what were they doing differently? And is Ecology going to say, hey, go do whatever the Public Works Department in Ellensburg did, and save us some money so we can spend more of that money on more? It just, something isn't adding up.
And you're referring to Ellensburg and the King County one, just so people are clear on this. You're referring to programs that like offer tax credits or rebates or whatever to electrify your home for heating, or different appliances that aren't fossil fuel reliant. I mean, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and there were a lot of projects with the same description, and the cost per metric ton of carbon reduced varied. Like, you had a lot of them said $1. Well, I'm gonna be a little skeptical. I'm gonna need to see the receipts on that. And then something to keep in mind: there are 4 different ways for them to calculate the amount of carbon reduced. And so I don't know if there's a different. I think Ecology told me that there really isn't a different. It wouldn't have made a difference using a different calculator. Because it's like, yeah, if there's one calculator that says we reduced 3 times the amount that another calculator would say, that's kind of a problem. So we're still looking into this, but I'm I'm very skeptical that they reduced 3.5 million metric tons of carbon through this $4 million project. And I think that most taxpayers are probably going to be skeptical. I think the question that we're going to find out is who came up with that figure and what math were they using?
What's it based on? Yeah, show me the math, because the math isn't mathing. I mean, and I think that's what, critics of the CCA, and I know it's going to be coming up in the upcoming legislative session where there's going to be a lot of pressure on ecology because, hey, you're still not producing the numbers. You are, by the statute that originally passed CCA, and they went back and gave them a little bit more wiggle room this last session, but they're supposed to be supplying this data to show that you, Joe taxpayer, having to pay, 50 cents more or whatever per gallon of gas, and even more for diesel now at the pump every single stinking time you fill up, and your utility bill is $20 more a month or whatever since this thing was implemented, that you're getting some bang for your buck, and that we're reducing emissions and saving the planet, and they're not producing the data. And that is the most infuriating thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got off on my soapbox there for a minute. Oh, well, I know you're not done covering this. I appreciate you for following the CCA stuff and for simplifying it too, because it's one of those ones that for a lot of people, they eyes glaze over when you start talking about the CCA and companies that have to buy.
Yeah, the too long didn't read version is there's a state program that raises the cost of the gas that you buy at the pump, and they're spending it on ferries. And smaller projects are claiming that they're punching well above their weight class when it comes to carbon reduction.
That's 100% it. Okay, good. You just gave me the cliff notes on your article, but I still would recommend.
No, still read the article.
Yeah, read the article at thecentersquare.com/Washington. He's TJ Martinell. I'm Carlene Johnson, and thanks for watching another episode of Washington in Focus.